7. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
What do you think?
Morning. I think we have failed young drivers as a society, and we need to train them better and train them earlier. I think that the idea of stopping them carrying passengers for 6 months is a good idea, because you've got peer pressure within a car. So yes, but I think graduated licenses are really difficult. You've got what we call the 3 E's, which is education, educating kids to drive earlier, and engineering, which is making roads better and safer, and then comes enforcement at the end of it. So I think we're failing in these two first ones, the education and the enforcement. I put my kids, all 3 of them, through a thing called a Young Driver, which allows under 17s to drive on private land with ADI instructors and learn the craft of driving and all the below the dashboard stuff and hazard awareness long before they try and do this very compressed period of time to learn about driving. I think we're failing them. So I want to see it in schools, and I want to see them being taught much, much earlier.
Nobody's actually pointing the finger of blame, I think, at the young driver, but maybe young drivers don't understand how different it is. You feel you can drive, you've passed your test, and then a load of your friends get in the back, and suddenly the mood is different, the pressure on you as a driver is very different, showing off, just larking around and having a great time. Aisha, how do you feel about the fact that clearly young drivers do need to be protected almost from themselves, don't they?
Well, I do agree with some of what Quentin has just said, especially about starting early, and especially about getting young people used to the dangers of being on the road.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. UK inflation goes up to its highest level since March, to 2.6%. Red Rachel says we're doing as well as the United States. But is that true? After the budget squeezed businesses and attacked farmers, will it make the government any money at all? Disappointment for the WASPI women as the Work and Pensions Secretary announces they will not receive compensation from the taxpayer for so-called historic injustices. Was this campaign ever going to achieve anything? The decision to give away the Chagos Islands has upset lots of people, including the new Prime Minister of Mauritius. The country has rejected the government's deal and demanded a renegotiation, a move the Prime Minister seems intent on seeing through. But to what end? Is it time to admit defeat and actually keep Chagos British? It's long been considered that the bedrock of a healthy society is a healthy marriage, and one new report believes that remains the case even in a modern society with marriage on the decline. And does Pope Francis owe his life to MI6? State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my formidable panel, former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and historian and broadcaster Dr Tessa Dunlop. As ever, I want to hear from you. Let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Joe Casper.
Good evening, it's just gone 8 o'clock. I'm Joe Casper in the GB Newsroom. And your top story this evening. So Keir Starmer has today held a call with US President-elect Donald Trump. The Prime Minister's spokesman said both men agreed on their joint ambition to strengthen the close and historic relationship between the US and the UK. Mr Starmer and Mr Trump reiterated the need for allies to stand together with Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. The Prime Minister also emphasised the importance of securing peace in the Middle East. The two men were also said to have looked forward to seeing each other at the earliest opportunity. Pleas of not guilty have been entered on behalf of Axel Rudapagana after he failed to reply when arraigned at Liverpool court on 3 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder following the deaths of 3 young girls in a knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport. Rudapagana appeared via video link in court as pleas of not guilty were entered to all 16 counts on the indictment. It comes as a police report published today found that officers were unprepared for the scale of the summer riots which followed the Southport attacks. The report said there were gaps in intelligence linked to social media and the dark web in the lead-up to the riots. The Prime Minister has been accused of playing politics with the WASPI women by the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch. Sir Keir Starmer is now facing pressure to give MPs a vote on his government's decision to rule out compensation for women affected by changes to the state pension age. He defended his position during PMQs earlier today.
Serious issue. It's a complex issue. The research, as he knows, shows that 90% of those impacted knew about the changes that were taking place. And I'm afraid to say the taxpayer simply can't afford the tens of billions of pounds in compensation when the evidence does show that 90% of those impacted did know about it. That's because of the state of our economy.
And finally, GB News understands this lunchtime that Prince Andrew, after speaking to Sarah, Duchess of York, will not attend the pre-Christmas lunch hosted by the King at Buckingham Palace tomorrow. It's thought Sarah Ferguson advised her ex-husband not to attend following the alleged Chinese spy scandal, as first reported in the Daily Mail. The King's brother has already pulled out of attending the royal Christmas gathering at Sandringham over Christmas. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. Those were your latest GB News headlines. I'm Joe Casper. More from me in an hour. Now back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. It's no surprise that Labour's budget measures have made the economy weaker. Inflation is up to 2.6% from 2.3% in October. But according to Red Rachel, this is fine because we're in the same boat as America.
The inflation numbers today show inflation at 2.6%. That is comparable to other countries around the world. In the United States, it's 2.7%, so slightly higher. In the euro area, it's 2.3%.
But this isn't really the case because America has been booming. Our overall economic performance is on a par with the sickly Europe, which is not an economic path we should want to be following. Unfortunately, this is a situation of stagflation, inflation of the 1970s, and it's part of a vicious cycle faced which challenges the Bank of England tomorrow. The need for lower interest rates to stimulate growth, yet the need to have higher interest rates to bring down inflation, hence the stagflation, stagnant economy, but inflation not being brought under control. And the government's actions, such as increasing state sector pay and imposing additional burdens on business, are inflationary measures because they siphon money away from the productive economic activities, shrinking some of the labour supply for the private sector, increasing wages for the public sector, and taxing people and requiring the businesses that are taxed to put up prices. And this is in an increasingly globalised economy. So these policies are actually rather outdated. They may have worked in the mid-20th century when you had a more closed economy, but now you've got to look at how companies distribute their investment globally. Modern companies look at their returns in relation to other investment opportunities around the world in other countries. So any tax or cost-based changes that reduce their net profit margins are likely to result in higher consumer prices or lower employment because they're mobile with their capital. Bear in mind, capital controls were removed in 1979. Furthermore, the taxes introduced in the budget on businesses, schools and farmers are not only projected to fail to raise much revenue, but may end up, and the CBI made a forecast on the farming tax yesterday, may end up costing the economy more than they contribute. increasing the likelihood of further tax rises as the deficit expands. So if the government wants to get a grip on inflation and ease the cost of living crisis on working people, it needs to prioritise growth and investment, not attack productive industries with short-term taxation to subsidise unproductive public sector workers. That only makes matters worse. It increases inflation and makes people poorer. As the late, great Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But now I'm joined by my formidable panel, the former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, Red Rachel has really bungled this, hasn't she?
For crying out loud, Jacob, that soliloquy was sort of like the Grinch come early for Christmas. I mean, it's all doom, gloom and despair. I do agree that the economy looks a little anaemic, but let's be honest, when inflation started falling, in the dying embers, in fact, of the last Conservative administration, it was because the low-hanging fruit were picked. Mainly, energy prices came down and therefore inflation came down. Actually, it's always harder to kick in the teeth that residual last percentage point of inflation. Yes, we had a crisis, particularly of morale, but not only, among public sector workers, probably to stymie the strikes, which would be carrying on right now if they hadn't. They needed to be offered a bung. They were offered that bung, and so as a result, hospitals will stay open over Christmas. My daughter didn't miss a day of school because once the one strikes, I know your children are privately educated, but for the vast majority of us, we rely on state education.
There were strikes at my daughter's school anyway last year. That's a separate matter.
Oh, I would really talk to them about that.
But the inflation figures are partly made worse by the government, by the budget decisions. That the 4.6% rate of increase for public sector workers, full 2% above inflation. The increase in duties, the tobacco tax increase has fed through to higher inflation. These are voluntary decisions of the government that are damaging the economy because it means the Bank of England can't cut interest rates.
But we knew that the legacy the Labour Party inherited was a poison chalice. It was like trying to get out of a room without a door. And I noticed that you don't
inflation and fastest growth in the G7. I think it was a pretty good inheritance. They got there.
Oh, for crying out loud, John, you know that is entirely disingenuous.
It had come right after a poor period.
As I've explained, that was because universally across the globe, energy prices fell and therefore inflation fell across the planet.
But it was also because of tax cuts and actions taken by the Conservative government to keep the deficit under control and trying to keep inflationary wage increases under control. And as soon as that genie was let out of the bottle, we're into this inflation round. And the inflation is worse than the 2.6. The wider number, which includes housing, and we all have housing costs, is up 3.5. And that's because rents are through the roof. They're up almost 10%. And people can't afford to rent a home in many parts of the country because they're not controlling the migration and they have done enormous damage to a lot of the smaller landlords who are being taxed out of business.
That's right.
And so supply and demand is going in the wrong direction. So there's a real housing crisis and it's very inflationary. And that is something the government ought to be immediately turning their attention to.
Tessa, John's absolutely right that lots of landlords are leaving the market. Therefore, the supply in the private rental sector is shrinking and demand remains. And therefore, rents have risen. You're finding this yourself.
Yes, while interest rates remain high, and we also have various environmental levies which are being put onto landlords and conditions and stipulations, it does mean that it is harder to make money as a landlord.
Yes,
there are issues around there that need address. But let's not pretend this has suddenly happened in the last 6 months.
But it's been made worse in the last 6 months. The rents have gone up more in the last 6 months.
The truth is, the Labour Party is the first party for decades that has genuinely committed to building and building from the bottom up, not just houses for those who can afford it, but for those who can't afford it. I noticed you immediately...
The last government increased the build rate and had targets, and this government wants to copy their targets and take them on a bit. But perfectly understandable, but they've then got to have the policies to do it. Instead, Rachel Reeves takes actions to put the mortgage
which we
rates
saw
up.
this week. Just
we
this
now
last
have
week
higher
passed.
10-year interest rates than we did under Liz Truss, which the Labour Party always complained about. They said that was a catastrophe. So presumably this is an even bigger catastrophe because the rates are now higher.
I can't understand why you're jumping with ants in your pants virtually out of your seat in indignation, when I would have thought you'd have been delighted last week to discover that the Labour Party are considering building on parts of the Green Belt, otherwise known as the Grey Belt. Let's hope it's not one of your golf courses, in order that they can actually house people. And I did object, and perhaps people won't have noticed because they're so used to hearing the word migrant bandied about erroneously on GB News, but you put some of this on migrants, and that's why we need more houses. The truth is, as you know, one of the main reasons
you can't leave them homeless, so we have to build, don't we?
But the truth is, actually, most of those new bills are because increased divorce numbers, increased people living alone,
Let's not look at the numbers. The bulk of it is 750,000 extra people a year coming in. They all need homes.
Multiple
Be realistic.
Majority of migrants live in multiple occupancy accommodation. Right,
so
and we're talking about recent arrivals. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying don't put it all on the migrants. I'm just saying don't put it all on the migrants.
So we had over 5 million people from the European Union in the period of our membership.
I know, I live with
years.
one of them. Multiple occupancy house, we are.
And they need housing, and you have under 2 people per household. That is 2.5 to 3 million houses needed purely for EU migrants.
Most of them have gone home now, Jacob, because
they
their
haven't
economies
actually,
are
because they'd be counted in the net migrant figures if they were leaving.
Quite
and
a few did leave.
the net migrant figures are still very high. So migrants are a very important part of the housing crisis. John's simply right
to be clear about the net migrant figure, you don't actually work out which are the new migrants coming in and who specifically are leaving. And recently, more Europeans have left than arrived. Fact.
Just before he left, Nigel Farage told me that 1/3 of Somalis are living in public housing, and that's housing taken away from people who are not here.
The last time I checked, Somalis didn't come from the EU. The last time I checked.
I know, but John was talking about the broader problem.
Peter just made the point about EU migration.
To clarify the facts about migration having effect on housing, which it really does. And mass migration had a huge effect. Anyway, thank you to my panel. After the break, disappointment for the WASPI women, as it's confirmed they will not receive compensation from the taxpayer for the so-called historic injustices. Was this campaign ever going to achieve anything?
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Phil Kearsey is bringing a new flavour to the Michelin-starred restaurant Pied à Terre as he becomes its new executive head chef. Customers can expect a menu that showcases modern British cooking, accompanied by classical French roots, which uses hyper-seasonal ingredients. What are hyper-seasonal ingredients? That's an interesting phrase.
It's more about just reacting to the seasonality of everything. We like to change the menu all the time. So basically, I surround myself with the best suppliers, and they tell me what's amazing at the moment, and then we try and celebrate that in the restaurant in many different forms, using taste, texture, and technique, and just try and celebrate something as humble as a broccoli stem or a cauliflower, using absolutely everything, and making sure we've got an ever-changing menu. So letting the seasons dictate, so it's never boring and we never get menu fatigue.
OK, your career has taken you around the world a bit.
Yeah.
And for example, you were in the United States. What did you learn there?
So, well, every chef I've worked for, it's about to take something from. A lot of chefs will go places and just stay in one establishment and get to the top, and then that's it. I've kind of then went to another chef to learn completely different things. Well, that's the brilliant thing, to be able to surround myself with such amazing chefs throughout my career, because I've learned different things from all of them. And you find out 5 different ways to do something, and you find the way that you like it the best. And it's also about understanding it takes a while to understand how the restaurant is, going through the history of all these amazing chefs that have been before me, the style, because it needs to make sense. You wouldn't have a dish that should be at the Fat Duck and then a dish that should be at the Waterside, you know. You need to make sure that it all makes sense and it goes together with the decor, the service, the wine serving. And so we want to be the restaurant, not that does a little bit of everything, we want to be the best French restaurant in London, you know.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were discussing stagflation quite vigorously, and the mail mogs have come in. Zoe has to say, good evening. Red Rachel's non-dom tax was going to solve most of our problems. When she realised this wasn't going to work, she went to Plan B, and that's where we are now. And Andrew says PAYE 20%, VAT 20%, NI 11%, road tax, BBC tax, corporation tax. Yes, the list goes on and on. But now the WASPI women are left disappointed today as their campaign for compensation payments to 3.8 million women born in the 1950s who claim they were not made aware of changes to the state pension age. The Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, announced the decision in the House of Commons, despite in 2019 throwing her support behind the campaign, as did the Reverend Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, who as leader of the opposition called for fair and fast compensation. The WASPI women are the latest in a long line of groups left disappointed by Labour. But the main question is whether the WASPI women should have been compensated at all and whether their decades-long campaign was ever going to achieve anything. Well, joining me now is Dr. Lisa Mackenzie, the Senior Lecturer at the University of Bedfordshire. Dr. Mackenzie, thank you very much for joining me. Don't people have some responsibility for finding out for themselves what is going to happen? Because when the pension age went up, it was extremely widely publicised. It was in all the newspapers. And it seems to me people ought to take some responsibility for their own lives.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not going to disagree with you there. But that's not my point in supporting the WASPI women. I know that that's the sort of technical issue that the government has used to get out of paying this. I know it's the technical issue, but actually there's a wider point here. And this is about treating our elderly and as people retire fairly. And I think that is what has happened with the WASPI women. They were not treated fairly. These are women who were, let me finish. These were women born in the 1950s who have worked all their lives, mostly from being 16. You know, most women of that age did not go to university and start careers. They have gone to work, they've raised children, they've probably been caring for elderly relatives as well. They always had an idea that they would be retiring at 60, and part way through their lives that has changed. And and it's about the fairness, really. So for me, this is about fairness.
OK, but they were given 20 years' notice that the age was going up. It went up from 60 initially to 65.
It wasn't quite 20 years.
It was made level with men that Britain lost a case in the European Court on the basis that the differential retirement age was unfair. Men went to work at 16 and did all sorts of things with their families and went down mines and all that sort of thing and still retired at 65. It was perfectly fair and reasonable and was extremely well publicised. It's just I don't see what was unfair with that when people are living longer and the country has to live within its means.
Yes, but again, my granddad and my dad were both men who went down the mines. So, as you know, I know this argument. But I do think, and did they bring it in line? Yes. But there was a point that men was retiring at 60 as well. And what they've done over the years is they've gradually moved that up from 60 to 65. And if we're talking, and now we're on 67. So for me, this is the fairness about what these women were promised. And let's not forget, a lot of these women at some point in their lives would have taken breaks because they were raising children, and at some point has probably been asked to top up their national insurance as well, which they've done. So they have played by the rules, they've worked, they've gone to work, they've done caring, they've been a great asset to the country. And I think for the amount of money that they've asked, and the Ombudsman actually agreed with this, it's the government that hasn't.
Yes, I know the Ombudsman's agreed, but I think the Ombudsman just got it wrong. that it was perfectly fair and there was plenty of notice, and that governments can't remain committed.
Well, we're arguing on different points, because you're arguing on the sort of technicality of when they were informed, etc. And that's what the government's using. And they are doing that purposefully to get themselves out of this. They have supported the WASPI women all the way through.
That's very important. Yeah, I agree with that. Because it would have been very easy for me when I was an MP to just agree with the WASPI women, and I never did. And therefore, at least I was consistent. I wasn't always popular, but at least I was consistent. Dr. Mackenzie, thank you so much. Let me now go to my panel, Sir John Redwood and Dr. Tessa Dunlop. John, the state doesn't have endless money. The issue really is that Keir Starmer signed up to supporting the WASPI women, and then the reality of the financial situation was he was never going to pay them.
Yes, I think it was cruel deception, misleading people. As you rightly say, Jacob, various Conservatives never promised to make those payments. We always thought they were very large. And it is an irony that people say this wasn't fair when it was a judgment of the European Court saying that the old system wasn't fair between men and women, and particularly because, of course, men on average died a bit earlier than women. And so they got far less pension from the same scheme than women did. And so that was what led the court to say you need to at least bring this into line. But I do think it's unforgivable for Keir Starmer and his senior colleagues to do this, because they've made all sorts of promises or inferred all sorts of promises in the lead up to the election, and they are ditching so many of them. And I want people to have confidence in politicians and great political parties. We thought that they were going to try and rebuild some trust, because the previous government hadn't always retained trust, and now they're far worse. And promise after promise just bites the dust, and they pick on different groups of people.
Keir Starmer on the steps of Downing Street saying integrity and all this was going to be the heart, that very preachy Reverend Starmer angle. And he just didn't tell the truth on this, did he? And practically every Labour MP can be found holding a poster saying back the WASPI women. It's pretty dishonest.
Before I jump onto your bandwagon of trolling Keir Starmer and Red Rachel full-time from your podium, I just want to go back to the issue of whether the WASPI women deserve compensation, a point that I think not only you and John perhaps inevitably have overlooked, but also so too the eloquent Dr. Mackenzie. The point is, those women spent more than half their working lives without even equal pay being ingrained in law. So this kind of, oh yes, well, poor men, they die a bit earlier. Yeah, most women were often doing the same job for less money. And even today, per hour, women still get paid less than men, let alone before equal pay was introduced in the 1970s. So I think the point is, yeah, I think women got to retire earlier, but they worked for less per head because of their gender for most of their lives. And yes, they do deserve... That's an extremely
interesting argument, but that's not the argument the WASPI women used.
Well, it's the one that they should use. To me,
they used a completely different argument to say they weren't given fair notice.
Right, I see that, but from my point of view, if we're going to argue about whether that generation of women deserve to be given a small bung, probably on a moral case for several reasons, including the fact they weren't given fair notice, but also they weren't given equal pay, then yes, they should be given a bung. The problem is the economy doesn't allow for it. Oh,
well, they should be given the fuel grant, shouldn't they? Keep the fuel grant. That would be the answer.
I wonder who was overseeing the economy for the last 14 years. And yes, of course, the cold hand of reality has gripped Keir Starmer on the shoulder. And in fact, he looked into the precipice and he saw this before the election because he didn't put it in his manifesto.
You're ridiculously generous to him, because it was obvious to everybody that no government was going to make this compensation, that the Ombudsman asked for too much. And Labour, when they were saying they would, knew they were speaking with a forked tongue. They're not that stupid.
But he didn't, therefore, put it in his manifesto.
No, he held up signs saying...
He was highly naive and he was disingenuous. Yes, he got it wrong.
Fair and fast compensation was what he called for.
He got it wrong, and it's disappointing.
But it's radically dishonest.
I'm also
John's point is so strong that it was very tempting as a backbench MP to say, yeah, let's go for the compensation the WASPI women. We had people writing to us the whole time. And actually we didn't, because we knew it couldn't be afforded and it wasn't deliverable. And one of the things about standing for election is you have to try and make promises that you at least think there's a chance of fulfilling.
It's extraordinary to me. Now I was in my B&Q in Elephant and Castle, and this woman came up to me who must have been a WASPI woman. She looked like she was born in the 1950s. She's your biggest fan. For the life of me, I can't work out why a single woman born in the 1950s would be your biggest fan. But there we have it. I agree. Keir Starmer set the mood music and he clicked the dial and he turned it in the wrong direction. And I understand fully why Diane Abbott called him out today in Parliament. And I'm very glad she's in there as the matriarch, because we need people like that talking truth to power from the Labour benches. They got this wrong. They know we don't have the cool 10 billion quid it would cost. But I feel sorry for the WASPI women.
They've got wrong for pensioners. You know, why are they doing in the pensioners?
Because pensioners are Conservative and train drivers are Labour, so they're bunging money to their own friends.
Yeah. That's what I say. The Brendas of Elephant and Castle tend to vote for Jacob Rees-Mogg. Oh, but he's no longer in the House of Commons. I wonder why not.
Well, I didn't stand in Elephant and Castle, so you didn't have a chance to vote for me. But this is quite serious for Keir Starmer, isn't it? Because for the first time yesterday, when Liz Kendall was making the statement, Labour backbenchers were getting up. And we know from our time in the House of Commons that once MPs start rebelling, they get a taste for it.
Well, I think that's right. And Keir Starmer's ratings have plummeted on an amazing scale. And so he is deeply unpopular. And all those great words he said to get elected about restoring trust and truth and only promising what he could deliver have turned out to be completely false. And so people are very distraught about it all. And then when you have a Chancellor of the Exchequer that drives the economy into the ground instead of promoting growth and is inflationary in the way you and I have been describing, the public say we had enough of this already, which is why we then had 3 million signing a petition for an extremely early election.
You are doomsayers.
Because we've got to move on.
There's quite a lot of good stuff going on.
We've got to move on. In a moment, Mauritius rejects the government's Chagos Islands deal and demands a renegotiation. Is it time to admit defeat and keep Chagos British? And
that's victory.
I know. Does the Holy Father owe his life to MI6? Possibly James Bond saved the Pope.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into tomorrow, we'll see cloud clearing the southeast, leaving a day of sunny spells and showers. It is going to be feeling much colder than it has done of late, though. To start off, though, to end on Wednesday, we'll see cloud and outbreaks of rain just move their way across the far south of the country. Colder to the far north, though, as we head into the evening. Still plenty of blustery showers reaching northwestern areas, a few feeding in inland at times where they'll likely fall as snow over high ground. But elsewhere, we'll see cloud outbreaks of rain slowly push their way towards the southeast and generally turning dry, but still with those showers just moving into parts of Wales and the southwest. And a very cold start to the day, particularly in those brisk northerly winds. So around across Scotland to start on Thursday, still we'll see plenty of showers around those coastal areas, and as they do move in further inland, they're likely to fall as snow across higher ground. Similar across Northern Ireland, still a chance we could see some wintry flurries around hilly areas and just to the northwest of England too. Even across Wales and parts of the southwest, a chance we could see some wintriness in the showers over hilly areas. The driest and brightest of the weather likely to be around eastern coasts across the far southeast as well, where actually there'll be plenty of sunshine around through much of the day, but it is going to be feeling much chillier than of late, particularly in those brisk northwesterly winds. So quite a change of feel as we head into Thursday, but still plenty of showers around coasts, but lots of sunshine too. You'll just have to wrap up warm to enjoy it. Highs of around 7 to 8 Celsius in the south, but highs only reaching around 4 degrees in the far northeast of Scotland, so fairly chilly here. As we head into Friday, once again we'll see outbreaks of rain slowly push their way towards the southeast of the country, moving in from the northwest. Plenty of blustery showers behind this, but to the far north and far south of this rain, once again there should be plenty of dry weather around. Turning slightly milder as we head into Saturday, but another chilly spell for Sunday and remaining fairly unsettled for the weekend. Bye for now.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about the WASPI women and the mail mogs have come in. Jules says, when the rise was first announced, I didn't mind. However, when it went from 63 years 10 months to 65 years and 11 months without much notice, it was hard for me. I raised children as well as work, paying large childcare fees. Feels very unfair, whatever the legalities. What with losing my £300 fuel bonus, I'm now very poor indeed. Starmer should never have courted women with false promises. That I absolutely agree with. And Anne, remember this age group didn't have equal pay. That was Tessa's point. Sorry, Jacob, I worked for DWP and I didn't know about this change until 2010 and I retired in 2016. The government's controversial decision to give away the Chagos Islands to Mauritius has hit another bump in the road as the country's new Prime Minister rejects Labour's deal and demands a renegotiation. Navin Chandra Ramgoolam told MPs the proposed deal would not produce the benefits that the nation could expect from such an agreement. With Donald Trump unhappy, Chagosians unhappy, countless parliamentarians unhappy, campaigners unhappy, and now even Mauritius unhappy, is it time for Sir Keir Starmer to accept defeat, but victory for the British, by keeping the Chagos Islands for our great country? Well, let me go to my panel, former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Dr Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, are you in the cheese-eating surrender monkey camp of giving away everything that's British, or would you like to keep this?
I'm a member of the British Committee for Returning the Parthenon Marbles, and I think along with...
There you go, so you want to give everything away?
Not everything, absolutely not. No, I think there can be unique cases made for certain things. If we include an archipelago as a thing, I think it's rather more than that. It's territorial. I understood why the Labour Party decided to set a precedent with this, just get it off the... It'd been sitting in the in-tray, it'd been sullying relations internationally, UN courts, etc., all said that actually the precedent sat with Mauritius. It doesn't really surprise me that there's a bit of brinkmanship going on. But what does disappoint me in terms of your editorial on this show is that of all the foreign affairs we could have talked about today, and given that we want a bit of cheer before Christmas, why we couldn't have celebrated John Healey in Kiev today, committing committing possibly British troops to the Ukrainian cause. I'm disappointed in you, Jacob.
Well, we can talk about Ukraine on other occasions, as we have done, but actually we're talking about something that is British and keeping it British, which seems the sensible thing to do.
Well, it's crazy to do what the government's proposing because, as many of your audience will know, not only are they wanting to give the islands away, but they're then wanting to lease back the crucial one, which is a very important naval base, and pay them for it. And I think one of the things that's gone wrong with the so-called deal with Mauritius is Mauritius see a very weak government and say, well, then why don't you pay us even more money?
No.
Well, and this is just robbing the British taxpayer. And Mauritius is an anti-nuclear weapons, anti-nuclear power country. So how are they going to be happy about an American naval base which clearly needs to allow nuclear-propelled and nuclear-armed weapon systems into that naval base?
Why don't we bring in Nigel Farage, who had something to say on this issue earlier on?
Can we please, if we respect the sovereignty of Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands on the basis it's what the people want, can we have a referendum of all of the eligible Chagosians and let them decide what the future sovereignty of the Chagos Islands is? That surely is the only fair solution.
The Chagosians who we evicted from their own islands.
That's right. But you were muttering off a microphone that there are no Chagosians. There are some.
I didn't mutter there were no Chagosians. I said there were no Chagosians living on the Chagos Islands.
Well, you didn't. You just said the first bit, but you may have intended to say the next bit. Shouldn't they have the right? Shouldn't they be consulted? Because they're no more Mauritian than you and I are.
I think that this is, as we know, it's also about strategic location of territory, which is why this is contentious, because before we could give it back to Mauritius, we'd already promised it to America as a significant military base.
We're not giving it back to Mauritius. It's never been Mauritian.
No, but let's be fair.
It's thousands of miles from
Mauritius.
Mauritius.
Let's be fair. Mauritius felt that in order to get their independence in 1968, they had to rescind their claim to what they believe is part of their territorial right.
But they don't really, because it never was Mauritian. It was merely administered from Mauritius in the same way as we used to administer Pitcairn from New Zealand.
Yeah, but that's an argument that sort of, it's very hard to identify what is and what isn't a nation because of the imperial legacy that we left behind. So I think that actually what's important here is to understand there are two unhappy parties, and it might well be you get your own way because it'll be kicked into the long grass.
Shouldn't we just put British interests first and be done with it? That's what actually matters.
Well, I think so. I mean, by all means, consult the Chagosians, and many of them have come to Britain and they are British citizens. But what matters is the defence of the Western democracies. Diego Garcia is a very important link in that chain of defensive systems into the Indian Ocean and onto the China Sea. Very important to us in America. I'm embarrassed, quite honestly, that a British Prime Minister does this to us, embarrasses us with our American ally, and then wants to land the British taxpayer with a huge sum of money to come up with a less good answer.
But actually, this is, in many respects, depending on your perspective, sullied our relationship internationally. Yes, now there's a Trump administration who's been decrying it. Yes. OK, the United Nations, for example, their courts and administration have long been pushing for us to give the Chagos Islands to the Mauritians.
That's been referred to as a judgment by the government. It's not a judgment. No. It's an advisory opinion.
Well, we've been advised.
And who cares if some UN committee doesn't like it? I mean, the UN, which had Zimbabwe and China on its human rights committee.
I would also like to point out
that serious organisation.
John said that the Mauritius government have looked at what they perceive to be a very weak government, have decided to tear up what's been put on offer. Actually, John, how can you suggest that Britain at the moment has a weak government when you look at the chaos across Europe, France, Germany, Romania, Britain?
But they have just torn up the agreement.
But we have a giant... The Labour Party have a giant majority, and whether you like it or not, whether you like what Keir Starmer's doing or not, it is not a weak government.
Well, then why hasn't Mauritius accepted the original deal?
It's got a big majority, but that doesn't make it strong.
It's not a weak
because
government.
It's being pushed all over the place.
It's not. It's leading in Ukraine.
If you can be pushed all over the place by Mauritius, who can't you be pushed about by?
Well, and the EU, they're being pushed all around the place, and the EU won't even go into the room until they give all the fish away.
Let's own
we don't want them giving the fish away.
The real headlines this week, the £27 billion of trade that particularly small exporting companies have lost because of Brexit. And thank goodness, Keir Starmer is the first Prime Minister of Britain post-Brexit who's going to sit down with the 27 leaders of Europe.
Trade is up since Brexit. And the figures that have been produced are absolutely bogus because they've included re-exports as British exports. So sugar exports are down because we claimed that sugar that came from Brazil to the UK and then off to the EU was a British export. It's all bonkers. There's very dishonest figures are being used about our trade with the EU.
Oh, so you choose to contest those figures?
I do, because they're simply wrong. And they've been looked at by people who are much more expert than I am. And the inclusion of the re-exports makes nonsense of the figures.
Just to clarify, this is research from the Centre for Economic Performance.
Yes, that's right. And they've got it absolutely, they've got it wrong.
A think tank based at the London School of Economics.
Yes, and they have included, government-funded, I believe, they have included re-exports, so fruit exports. Tropical fruit exports have gone down. Yes, of course they have, because under old EU accounting practices, they were counted as a British export to Europe. They are now counted as coming from tropical countries. This is rather off the Chagos. Let's get back finally to Chagos, because I think John and I agree that it is a crucial strategic interest and that government should not be pushed about by small little countries.
They were going to keep the military base. That's why the Mauritians don't want it, because we were going to hold on to a lease for over 100 years.
For which we were going to pay millions of pounds, and the government won't even tell us how much.
Well, they may impose terms on it as well, and if the other islands are then populated, it becomes much more difficult to run the base in an orderly way.
Absolutely. There we go. Well, thank you very much to my panel, who I may wish a very happy Christmas to. After the messages from our sponsors, a new report believes that marriage remains the bedrock of a strong society, even in this brave new world with marriage on the decline.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast. There will actually be some hazardous weather across parts of southern Europe through the next few days, with a strong Mistral wind developing over southern France and into Corsica, leading gusts here of around 70 miles per hour and some hefty showers with that as well. Further east, and we have some heavy thunderstorms pushing across parts of Greece and into Turkey, and here we could see rainfall totals building up to around 200 millimetres. Elsewhere, there will be some fine weather around, with temperatures near or a little bit below average.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Last orders at the bar, and I'm joined by Geordie Shore star Ricky Guanaccio. Have I said that right? Is that Italian?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Is Italian? Your parents
Well
Italian?
done.
Is it?
Pronunciation was pretty much perfect.
Yeah, well, there you go. So, look, mate, Geordie Shore, I've never watched it, mate, so I do apologise about that. But I know these reality TV shows are making big stars out of the people, making you famous, making you loads of money. Is it worth it?
For me personally, yeah. It's been a hell of a career. Been a hell of a lot of fun doing it. Ups and downs, but first and foremost, money-wise, yeah.
That's good. So people stopping in the street, you being famous, wanting the autograph and all. How do you cope with that, Ricky?
Well, when we first started doing the show, I mean, we got our show off the back of Jersey Shore in America. We never expected the fame that we got, and you know, being one of the biggest reality TV shows in the UK and now the world. You know, it's in 150 odd countries worldwide. Wow. It's pretty crazy. It's when you're living in houses. I mean, for example, Geordie Shore and Love Island's probably the same as well. When you're living in villas and you're living in houses, the arguing side sort of plays on your mind. You've got to deal with all that. You know, it's a hard place to be. It's a pressure cooker.
You're living in one of these villas, Ricky, or one of these houses. Do you ever wake up one morning and think, what am I doing here?
When I first started, yes. Yeah. Now, I love it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I don't mind all the, you know, there's no emotion connecting me now with filming. It's kind of like I go in there, it's fun, or it's, you know, it's dramatic, whatever it may be.
Have you ever worked behind a bar?
No.
No?
For not a long period of time. My mum and dad had a...
Well, I can
definitely mess this one up.
Yeah, I can actually believe that you've never worked behind a bar.
Yeah, so my parents sacked us when I worked in the restaurant.
Well, obviously, I mean, you wouldn't get a job here with a pint like that, would you?
Do you want it?
No, mate, no.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about Chagos, and Adam says, as defence is the first duty of government, Sir Keir Starmer should not allow anything that puts us at greater risk. Keep British what is British. And Pam says, in bold capital letters, keep Chagos British. It's what the Chagosians want. Ah, yes, well, that's a very fair point. Marriage, a cornerstone of society or a relic of the past. A new report by Civitas shows that over the last century, marriage rates have changed dramatically. After peaking in the 1970s, the number of marriages today is at a third of the level it was 50 years ago. But society isn't becoming more single. Instead, cohabitation, unmarried couples living together, has risen sharply. As marriage evolves, so does society. Is this progress or something to be concerned about? Marriage has long been credited as the bedrock of a healthy society. Does this report prove it? Well, I'm joined now by the senior researcher at Civitas and author of this report, Daniel Lilly. Daniel, first of all, thank you very much for coming in. One of the things your report points out is that rich people are still quite likely to get married, but poorer people aren't. Why do you think that is?
Yes, I mean, and to an extraordinary degree, you have the marriage rate in terms of, if you look at mothers at the point that they have their first child, around 4 in 5 affluent university-educated women will be married. And then if you take women who have not got a university education, maybe don't have A-levels, you're down to about a fifth, or perhaps a third, depending on how you measure these things. And that's a huge change. That's not a slight sort of detail. That's a completely different culture within affluent and less affluent parts of the country. I think there are a few things going on. One thing we talk about a lot in the report is just that weddings are extortionate, and that there is this sort of, if you are trying to work out where best to get pound for pound value, you would go for housing, or you would go for something like that instead.
When you say extortionate, I think you're saying £500 minimum cost for a wedding.
Yes, so which is not as bad. So you're absolutely right. But unless you are having an Anglican wedding, in which case you can get married in a church in your local parish, then in order to have a wedding that's £500, you have to do nothing that we would traditionally associate with a wedding. You would have what is often known as a U+2 at a registry office.
Right.
But it is still possible. But even £500 is...
Yeah, absolutely.
A tangible amount of
money for people who are less well off, and that the average wedding is something like £20,000. So it becomes very expensive quite quickly.
Yes, yeah. I do think that £20,000 figure is inflated because the people they survey are always people who purchase wedding magazines.
Right.
But it certainly still makes an illustrative point. I mean, that's an extraordinary cost.
And to what extent do you think the benefit system encourages people not to get married? Because if you are ostensibly single and you don't tell the DWP that you are cohabiting, you get more generous benefits.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's particularly an incentive for couples not to cohabit and to remain separate in terms of their living arrangements. I don't find that a compelling answer as to why couples that have made the decision to live together have then not gone ahead and got married. And the thing we see, if we look at the data for the last 50 years, the thing that has really risen rapidly, sort of 3.5 times in the last 40 years, is cohabitation. This sort of, which essentially sort of, you do everything that would traditionally be associated with being married, but you don't see marriage as necessary.
And is that cultural? Because in the 1970s, that would have been called living in sin. And nobody calls it that anymore, not even me.
Yes, yeah. Yes, well, I think it's an interesting question. It's certainly cultural. You know, I mean, this is something that would have, as you say, been completely shunned. And it's now, my wife and I got married when I was 21, and our friends thought it was utterly bizarre that we hadn't at least lived together for a few years. And that's a huge cultural shift. I think it is also logical. If you don't feel a religious compulsion to get married before you live together, then to be able to trial your relationship is a sensible thing to do before you commit to one another permanently.
But the permanent commitment of marriage is very good for children. The outcomes for children are much better in married couples, regardless of income stream. So poorer couples have better outcomes for their children if they're married, richer couples as well. It's a great stabilising force for society.
Absolutely. So this is really the centrepiece of the argument of the report, is that we say, look, yes, it's often unpopular to say that marriage is a wonderful thing and to say that marriage is a beautiful thing, but the numbers show that marriage matters more than affluence, marriage matters more than education level, if what you want is a stable home. And there is a huge amount of evidence that for a child, having a stable home where you're loved is a massive, massive privilege.
And that marriages are more likely to last than cohabitation.
Absolutely. So particularly if you follow, because it's a very difficult period for relationships when you first have children. And if you follow that period in particular, in the first 5 years, you've roughly, in terms of your likelihood of breaking up, you've roughly got a 3-to-1. So cohabiting relationships are 3 times more likely to split in that 5-year window.
And that is the key point of a child's life, because we know that the early years are so important developmentally, and therefore stability at that point is more important than almost anything.
Absolutely, as the Archduke said on your show last week.
Yes, indeed. You're a child at 3, and then that's when the education's complete.
Yeah.
And indeed, as Andrew Leadsom has campaigned for. And so what do you think politicians could do? I was really struck, it's in your press release, actually, that politicians don't talk about marriage. But when you look at the cabinet and the shadow cabinet, they're almost all married.
Yes, yeah.
But most of their constituents won't be. So they're not, it's do as I say, not as I do. Don't be fussed about it. But actually, I think marriage is very important. Do you think there's more politicians could do? Is there anything that could be done in legislation? Should the churches do more?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think actually it gets to quite a deep political question, which is, does culture follow law or does law follow culture? Because if law follows culture, it's actually very difficult for government to do anything. I mean, I think that politicians should be clearer that marriage is a good thing. And there's this sort of, there's the George Bush phrase of a soft bigotry of low expectations, that you sort of, it's actually quite rude to not tell someone the right thing to do on the grounds that you almost think less of them. But I would sort of, as a conservative instinct, think actually there's only so much the law can do. It's a cultural matter, and the law tends to react to, not cause those things.
Well, perhaps we need more from the churches to encourage people and remind people that marriage is, in fact, a sacrament, a great gift from God, an outward sign of an inward grace, and that they don't talk about it very much, do they?
Yes, I know. I suppose the thing that upsets me about that is that there's not enough just articulation of the great joy of marriage, that this is a wonderful thing to do, to take on the adventure of life entirely with another person, and to sort of to be as two in that.
Well, I've just done a thing with Discovery Plus, and one of the nicest things about it is that it's shown the rest of the country what a wonderful wife I have, and I must confess I'm extremely proud of that. And thank you so much for coming on. Not another sacrament, but more religion. During England's Protestant Reformation, Sir Francis Walsingham served as spymaster to Queen Elizabeth I, infiltrating Catholic conspirators in order to feed information to the Crown and quash any attempts at home and abroad of Catholics to gather, worship, evangelise, or even, of course, depose the Queen. Today, however, another Francis owes his life to British spies, Pope Francis. The Holy Father has revealed in his upcoming autobiography that during a 2021 visit to Iraq to visit persecuted Christians, an ISIS bomb plot was foiled by British intelligence services. Pope Francis said, "The police told the Vatican gendarmes about information supplied by British intelligence. A woman carrying explosives, a young suicide bomber, was heading to Mosul to blow herself up during the papal visit, and a truck was also on its way at top speed with the same intent." Well, Francis Walsingham foiled plots made by the papacy, but now an Englishman foils plots against the papacy. Perhaps Our Lady's diary will be returned to where it ought to be. In the words of another St. Francis of Assisi, where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Well, on that happy note, that's all from me. And next, it's the great Patrick Christys. Patrick, are you going to be having some religion on your programme this evening?
In a way, Jacob. We are now the capital of the Western world for Sharia courts. So that's something, isn't it? We're going to be talking about that. Ridiculous. Also, we're giving away council houses to foreigners who can't speak English. We know that already, but now we're actively advertising council houses to them. Shouldn't they be going to Brits first? Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Minister, has got an exclusive with me. He's setting out his plan to cut crime. So we're going to be talking about all of that. And look, the WASPI women story. I think this is a massive betrayal. Well, you can make the economic case for not giving them the money. I disagree with that. But it's the betrayal. It's the lies. And I'm going to pose the question, Jacob, did Keir Starmer lie his way into Downing Street? We're going to hear from an incredibly passionate WASPI woman on my show later tonight, so stay tuned for all of that.
Well, I think the answer to that, as my children might say, is liar, liar, pants on fire. That the WASPI women were fundamentally misled. They thought they would get the money. I don't agree with you. I don't think the country can afford it, and I don't think they were misled. But he certainly didn't tell the truth. Well, that's going to be a great programme. It's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset is what you're waiting for. I think it's going to be perfect weather in Somerset for marriages tomorrow, and I would strongly encourage you to go out in the glorious summer sunshine and get married if you haven't done so already.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into tomorrow, we'll see cloud clearing the southeast, leaving a day of sunny spells and showers. It is going to be feeling much colder than it has done of late, though. To start off, though, to end on Wednesday, we'll see cloud and outbreaks of rain just move their way across the far south of the country. Colder to the far north, though, as we head into the evening. Still plenty of blustery showers reaching northwestern areas, a few feeding in inland at times where they'll likely fall as snow over high ground. But elsewhere, we'll see cloud outbreaks of rain slowly push their way towards the southeast and generally turning dry, but still with those showers just moving into parts of Wales and the southwest. And a very cold start to the day, particularly in those brisk northerly winds. So round across Scotland to start on Thursday. Still, we'll see plenty of showers around those coastal areas, and as they do move in further inland, they're likely to fall as snow across higher ground. Similar across Northern Ireland, still a chance we could see some wintry flurries around hilly areas and just to the northwest of England too. Even across Wales and parts of the southwest, a chance we could see some wintriness in the showers over hilly areas. The driest and brightest of the weather likely to be around eastern coasts across the far southeast as well, where actually there'll be plenty of sunshine around through much of the day, but it is going to be feeling much chillier than of late, particularly in those brisk northwesterly winds. So quite a change of feel as we head into Thursday, but still plenty of showers around coasts, but lots of sunshine too. You'll just have to wrap up warm to enjoy it. Highs of around 7 to 8 Celsius in the south, but highs only reaching around 4 degrees in the far northeast of Scotland, so fairly chilly here. As we head into Friday, once again, we'll see outbreaks of rain slowly push their way towards the southeast of the country, moving in from the northwest. Plenty of blustery showers behind this, but to the far north and far south of this rain, once again, there should be plenty of dry weather around. Turning slightly milder as we head into Saturday, but another chilly spell for Sunday and remaining fairly unsettled for the weekend. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest, greatest Great British giveaway so far, with your chance to win a spectacular £50,000 in tax-free cash. 2025 could be amazing, with plenty of treats, holidays and fun on the horizon. How would you enjoy that cash? £50,000 will make someone our biggest ever winner. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
The Daily Mail now, Josh, and pub landlords have to worry about more than the optics when it comes to offensive banter,
Yeah,
it seems.
This is a really big story and important. Pub landlords could have